Step into the unnerving shadows of Appalachia, where every whisper in the woods and every echo in the mines might be something far more sinister than folklore ever dared suggest. Tonight, Haunted Fears takes you on a journey deeper than ever before, to places locals refuse to tread after dark and memories families have tried to bury for generations. Is it just superstition that keeps doors locked tight at midnight, or is there a chilling truth that binds these remote valleys together? If you're ready to become one of us, brave enough to listen until the last story ends, smash that subscribe button and join the Haunted Fears horror family. There's always room for one more in the shadows. Will you dare to stay with us? Sometimes there's a sound in the dark that means more than any words ever could. The old folks used to listen for knocks deep underground, their own kind of warning, unspoken and sacred. I never believed in omens until the night I learned one could save your life. They say West Virginia coal dust never leaves you, not from your lungs, not from your shirt sleeves, not from the lines that crease your hands. My name is Callie, and I was raised in the company houses listening to stories carried up the mine shaft at Shift's End. My daddy and his brothers swore there was a language to the deep, a way the earth told you it was about to swallow something or someone whole. The year the old Raleigh County shaft closed, I was just old enough to understand how men vanished and how silence settled over their kitchens afterward. The mine loomed behind our house, sagging timbers and rusted carts poking through vines. Still, everyone said to keep away. Curiosity, or maybe the need to claim some piece of my family's story, got the better of me and a friend one thick August night. We waited until my mama's lamplight flickered out, then coaxed open the sagging gate and picked our way by memory and moonlight. The air in the shaft was so dense it pressed against your skin, all coal and mildew and something colder, all the way down. Our breath fogged beneath our headlamps. The old tracks gleamed with dew, and water dripped steady from somewhere farther in, like an old faucet left to leak in the dark. We moved quiet, like this was a place meant more for whispers than for laughter. Sometimes people in town spoke of the knocking, a sound that meant you better turn back. I used to laugh at those tales, imagining some prankster, or maybe just the settling of rock and timber, gravity's slow work through decades. That night, I wasn't laughing. Halfway to Scene 4, we heard the first knock. It wasn't a falling stone or a scratch of rat nails. No, it rang silver and sharp, echoing once and then gone. I froze. My friend whispered, but her words didn't mean anything. Not then. My own chest hollowed out with a strange animal fear. Another knock, closer this time, as if it were moving with us, just out of the reach of our lights. My hand found the damp wall, and I felt ridges, names carved there, rough impressions of men who'd worked their time, some who never came back. How many of them heard such a knocking? Was it real, or was the coal dust thick enough to play tricks on minds already burdened with worry and night shift exhaustion? I called out, feeling foolish and brave at the same time. But only the air answered back, a huff of cold breath, an echo layered over a deeper silence. We should have turned back, but pride, or maybe the certainty that nothing real waited for us in the dark, pushed us on. The third knock came, just as we crossed the threshold into the last chamber before the collapse. This time, it was as though someone tapped. Right on the track before us, metal on metal, and my knees nearly buckled. For a moment, I could smell something sharp, almost sweet, mixed with the staleness and the rot, sweat and fear and coal oil. My friend tugged at my sleeve, eyes wide and rimmed with the gleam of the headlamp. She whispered, "We need to get out." And suddenly I felt it too. A pressure, a sense of being watched, not from ahead, but from every angle at once, like the shadows themselves wanted us gone. We scrambled back, barely remembering where sunlight lived. The air behind us thickened, every footstep drowned by the memory of those 3 sharp knocks. Back in our yard, Soaked in sweat and grime, I swore I felt the world shift. Above us, the mine's silhouette seemed to flicker in the watery dawn. Next morning, sirens woke the town. Part of the shaft had caved in overnight. The rescue men found old lunch pails and a helmet with a dent that matched the shape of a knuckle. They didn't find anything else, no cause, none that made sense to those who didn't believe. For years after, I wondered if the knocking was only for us or for anyone who'd listen. Anyone with enough coal dust in their veins to tell a warning from a story. The old men in the bar would say sometimes, "The mind gives what it takes, if you know how to listen." I never went back inside, not even when the daredevil kids promised money or fame. Some debts are owed only to the dark, and I paid in full that night. As I got older, I noticed other signs. How birds never landed on the shaft's roof. How dogs whimpered if you led them too close. How you could press your ear to the ground some evenings and feel a distant halting beat not unlike an old man's heart. In town, folks whispered that our mine was different. Some claimed to see figures at the edge of dusk, carrying old lamps or wearing coats eaten away by moisture and time. I sat silent through their stories, remembering the way metal can speak when the living have nothing left to say. Sometimes, even now, I'll wake in the near dark and swear I hear it. 1, 2, 3. Distant knocks meant not for terror but for warning. Never quite sure if I made it out because I was brave, or because something older and sadder was looking out for a girl who never truly wanted to understand. When people ask why I never moved away, why I live close to the old gate and watch the mountains change with the season, I say I'm waiting. Waiting for a sound that means more than words. A language for those of us who belong to this ground, body and shadow both. Sometimes the earth remembers those who listen, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it lets you go. The lantern light crept through the fog with a steady patience, never rushing, never dimming, just glowing where no living soul should have dared to walk. I could hear her voice long before I saw anything. Soft, thin, full of a grief that didn't care who I was or what I'd come searching for. They call me Love, though there's little tender about these hills once the sun sets and the old night starts moving between the trees. My family planted roots in this hollow before roads came and before names meant more than survival. My earliest memory isn't laughter or song. It's warnings whispered at windows, stories wound tight in hush and fear. There was always talk of Birch Ridge and that wandering light no one could explain, a lantern bobbing across the slope where no human should have business after midnight. It was the kind of tale passed down over coffee grounds and rainy Sundays, but there was never any comfort in the retelling. At first, I half believed the light was nothing but wandering men, maybe left behind by drink or heartbreak, staggering home long after the crossroads emptied. Then, as the years wore heavy and the old folks thinned out, explanations dried up. The story sharpened. The light belonged to a mother who lost her son to the woods, calling, searching, her lantern stronger on the foggiest nights. The ridge itself felt haunted in daylight, wild thicket and bone-white birch trunks stacked so dense that even at noon, nothing gold reached the ground. No animal trails, no bird calls, just silence trying to thicken itself into protection. My mind spun around the warnings like autumn leaves caught in a gutter. If you see the lantern, they said, never answer, no matter what you hear. One November, not yet grown but too old for childish dares, I found myself staring at the ridge from the barn doorway. Clouds sat heavy, and mist hung low like river water left without a breeze. I was restless in a way that felt dangerous, almost rebellious. Nights in the hollow took on a slow, eerie weight, and something ugly was building under my ribs. It was just past midnight when I saw it. The barn's lantern had long been extinguished, but there it was. Half-light, orange and steady, floating above the bramble at the ridge's bottom. My breath caught hard. I should have gone inside, but my feet followed the glow like a secret song I barely understood. There was no wind, only the careful scuff of my shoes through the dead leaves and the hush between each heartbeat. The voice came softer than fog, but it curled around my bones, clean and true. "Come here," she said. "Find me." Her tone was pleading, but the ache behind it was sharp, nearly physical, as if loss itself had found a mouth in the night. Every step brought me closer to the light and farther from the world I knew. I reached the edge of the birch stand and saw the lantern, orange and flickering, hovering just above a patch of stones. The air, suddenly frozen, pressed in so cold that my ears began to ring. I realized I hadn't once wondered how she could hold a flame in mist so thick, nor why the branches seemed to bend toward the glow as though mourning. The woman's voice rose again, a name repeated over and over, never mine, but it pressed in, urgent and sorrowful. I couldn't bring myself to answer, not at first, something in me resisting out of old, inherited terror. Shadows seemed to twist behind the light, forming shapes that fluttered and broke apart before I could focus. I chased the glow halfway up the ridge, my pulse loud in my throat. The sadness grew heavier with each step, the grief grinding at me, sharp as hunger, but somehow colder. A sudden wind rattled the branches and set the lantern spinning in a wide, impossible loop. The voice howled, growing sharper, almost desperate, a mother's cry face to pitiless face, with an eternity alone. I stumbled, knees wet with dew and hands scraped raw. The ground was littered with faded cloth, bits of ribbon, and a child's shoe, old, weathered, like offerings left for a spirit no one wanted to anger. I gasped, breath becoming visible in the murk, and the lantern's light began to fade, its color shifting from orange to white, so faint it felt like memory rather than flame. "Help me," the voice whimpered. I managed a word, unsure if it was for her or for myself, but the light blinked out right as the air around me thickened, near suffocating in its sadness. The woods went mute. I scrambled home, tripping over roots and catching my skin on brambles too soft to leave scars, but just rough enough that I would remember this night for years. When sunrise broke, golden but cold, I found my way into the kitchen stiff and silent. The old warning stayed in my head with a new clarity. Do not follow the lantern. Do not speak the name. Do not let grief twist you into someone who belongs more to darkness than to daylight. I never told anyone what I saw, but for weeks afterward, every foggy dawn brought a faint echo of her voice across the hollow. Sometimes I'd spot a light moving where no lamp should be, and some mornings I'd find proof. A faded scrap of cloth, a footprint in places no living feet could tread. Over time, the ache of that night has settled underneath my skin, a reminder that loneliness in these mountains can shape itself into any form it pleases, even the glow of hope within the worst kind of loss. Birch Ridge still stands quiet, all white bark and wild shadow undisturbed by time. I keep to familiar trails, close to home and far from the hollow's edge. On foggy nights, I leave the barn door bolted, close the curtains, and pretend not to see light moving through the brambles. Some things you can't rescue, no matter how hard their voices plead, and some sorrow you carry, not because you chose it, but because the mountain chose you. And when the lantern returns, as it always does, I remember myself in her grief, a stranger to the night, just another soul in the hollow. The only kindness left is in not answering. Sometimes silence is all you can offer what's already lost. I was always told never to answer the whistle at night, no matter how sweet its tune or how lonely the air felt. But when the melody drifted through my window, playful, unbroken, I couldn't help myself. I whistled back, and that's the moment everything changed. Folks around White Hollow know when to keep their windows shut and their voices low, especially after sunset when the hills start to echo with secrets best left unanswered. My name is Andy, and I used to think those stories were just a way to keep us kids from wandering too far, too late. I was stubborn, though, If there was a rule, I'd find a way to skirt it, testing the edges of what grown folks called safe. Our house squatted on the rim of White Hollow like it was the first to greet the morning and the last to see the dusk. Some nights, when the moon skimmed flat over the pines and the wind hit right, you'd hear a sound in the distance. A clear whistle, carrying a tune older than anyone in town. It never came from one direction, and it never faded before sunrise. Everyone said not to answer, not with a word, and not with a note. The first time I heard it up close, I was 12, tucked under thick quilts, listening for rain when the whistle slid in, impossibly clear, sweet as creek water in July. It sounded like someone calling for company, playful but faintly mournful, pulling at places inside me that I rarely admitted were empty. Against every warning stitched into my head, I made myself small beside the window and whistled back. I didn't copy the tune exactly, just let out a quick, sharp note, testing the echo, daring whatever hid in the night to play along. There was a pause, a long breath where even the crickets seemed to hush. Then the tune restarted softer, closer, as if my answer had changed its mind about where it wanted to go. I shivered, but pride welded me to the spot. I whistled again, this time in proper imitation. For several minutes we traded notes, me and the thing with no face out in the dark. It almost felt like a game. That was before anything felt wrong. The last note it sent was off-key, sharp, almost angry, and the air turned cold, heavy enough to slow my lungs. Outside, the wind whipped up and rattled loose shingles on the roof. The next morning, something had changed. There, beneath the window, were muddy footprints. Small, deep, and pressed in a pattern that circled the house twice. They weren't mine. The ground should have been bone-dry, but the tracks glistened like morning dew. And around the edges, I counted torn leaves, shreds of moss, and one strange feather, black, slick, longer than any bird the region wears. I didn't tell anyone right away. Who'd believe a tune could summon footprints, or that the whistle in the night had business with someone like me? That evening, I felt restless, like a string had been pulled taut behind my ribs. I waited again, peering through the crack in the curtains for movement, for a face or a hand or anything I could name. Not a thing moved, but after the house quieted, the whistle came back, slower, almost sad. This time, I said nothing. I hid under the covers and tried to believe in rational things. Wind, stray animals, a wandering vagrant carrying a tin flute. But all night, the footprints grew. Fresh mud, patterned in odd loops, pressing closer to the door, and then back again. By the third night, the feeling was stronger. The whistle would come clear as church bells, directly beneath my window. I pressed my ear to the panes, words heavy on my tongue, but I kept silent. When I couldn't stand it, I whistled. Just a single note, like closing the door with a secret handshake. Something scratched on the wood. The dog whined. My breath shortened. That morning, the footprints spiraled from the house to the edge of the woods and vanished, stopped dead in the heart of a root-bound oak. Days passed. I grew wary, double-checking locks, keeping lights burning long after bedtime. Still, the whistling returned, sometimes calling, sometimes mocking, changing tune with every hesitant response. I kept my lips shut after the third reply, but the thing out there didn't care much for patience. On the fifth morning, a handful of slate-gray feathers lay scattered by the porch. Odd, black, glimmering with oil. The wind smelled sharp, like old tobacco and rain. I tried telling myself it was nothing, just the world's way of poking holes in a life too certain for its own good. But people began to notice. The dog refused to go outside after sunset. Neighbors complained about odd tracks in the grass, and children whispered of the whistler in schoolyards and at church suppers. The turning point came when I woke to see something standing at the edge of our yard, a silhouette with hunched shoulders, its head cocked, as if listening for something deep inside the house. It vanished when the lamp flickered on, leaving behind a half circle of footprints pressed into the grass. Not mud this time. but ash. I asked the oldest neighbor if she knew about such things. Her eyes went dark, and she shook her head. Some music is meant for calling things home, but not every tune means you'll get what you expect. Her warning clung to me like a second skin. Now, on nights when the clouds swallow the moon and the wind is calm enough for notes to travel, I listen for the whistler. I leave the curtains drawn, the lights on, and hum songs I know only the living can hear. Sometimes the urge to answer burns bright as hunger. Still, I force my lips shut, remembering the circles on the ground and the angry sharp notes in the air. The message is plain. Here, in White Hollow, the world beyond the window is listening just as much as you are. Every whistle has a place to circle, someone willing to play back. My advice, don't be that someone. Sometimes, when I hear that tune bleeding through the boards, I whisper in the dark not to answer. I've learned the smallest invitation can carry home more than just a melody. Out here, even greeting the night can cost you something you never meant to give. Every time the shower curtain rippled, I caught the faintest glimpse of movement. Like someone small was always just out of sight, waiting on the cold tiles. I told myself it was just the plumbing or my nerves, but I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't the only one living in that apartment. The first day I moved into the converted hospital was a mess of boxes and nerves. My name is Johanna, and until then, I'd never lived alone. The building had been apartments for decades, but the bones beneath, the tile and pipes and echoing halls, were stitched together from another time. Some rooms still carried the old brass numbers, and the hallways kept a strange hush, even on busy afternoons. Most of my friends called the place creepy, but I needed somewhere cheap and close to work. My unit was on the 3rd floor, windows looking out over an alley crowded with bent maples and weedy wildflowers. The kitchen still smelled faintly of antiseptic, no matter how often I left the window open. After a while, I learned the quirks of the place, the heater clicking loudest at 3 a.m., the pipes thumping with no rhythm, and the elevator's groan like a sigh deep in its chest. But the bathroom was different. The very first evening, as I turned on the light, I noticed the slight sway of the lace curtain over the tub. I'd laugh at myself and try to ignore the chill, but night after night, it kept happening. Even when the windows were closed, the curtain moved softly, brushing the edge of the tub like a child running fingers along a fence. I started taking quick showers, keeping my back to the wall and my eyes on the curtain. Once, I saw the impression of small feet on the water-darkened tiles, a splashy, shifting pattern that disappeared by morning. It was never dramatic. No slamming doors or rattling walls, just a sense that every sound was overheard by someone I couldn't see. Little things would vanish, a washcloth, a comb, then show up days later in odd places, under the sink or balanced against the curtain rod. I started talking out loud, nervous and half joking. You can have whatever you want. Just let me get clean. Sometimes I caught myself listening for a reply. One afternoon, after a long shift, I found the bathroom window fogged over. Odd, because I hadn't used the shower since morning. Wiping it clear with my sleeve, I gasped. Written there, in a child's looping scrawl, was a single word. Play. My heart thudded, but the message faded in seconds, as though it had never been. I left the house and walked around the block 3 times before going back inside. At night, dreams came fierce and unsettled. A girl's shadow in the hallway. A lullaby hummed somewhere near my pillow. I saw flashes of white, hospital slippers, a gown hem, fingers curled around the curtain's edge. My sleep fractured into fragments, always waking to the sound of water dripping, or the sense of being watched. In the mornings, the tile felt warm, beneath my feet briefly, as if someone had walked there just ahead of me. I asked the building manager if anyone knew about strange noises or leaks. He only shrugged, eyes dark-circled, muttering that old buildings creak and groan in ways you get used to, if you want to stay. I think he knew more than he let on, but pressing him for answers felt dangerous somehow. I tried to shake it off. Busier days, loud music, phone calls late into the night. But always the hush returned, and the subtle games began again. A towel missing, then back. Wet footprints in the hall with no rain outside. Once, a child's rubber ball rolled gently from under the sink while I brushed my teeth, stopping at my toes. Eventually, I asked a neighbor, an older woman who'd lived there since before the conversion, someone with stories and time. She said quietly that in the hospital's final years, they boarded up sections at a time. Children left alone at night would wander, looking for nurses or mothers who never came back. They just want someone to notice they're there, she told me, in a voice so soft it blended with the rain. After that, I began to speak kindly whenever I entered the bathroom. I told the room good morning and good night, and left an old toy from the thrift store on the windowsill. The curtains still fluttered, sometimes more boldly, and the footprints never fully stopped appearing. But there was a new piece to the silence. An uneasy truce, maybe, or simple acceptance. It's been over a year now. I've learned to share my home with the quiet, the chills, the small shadows that linger between mirror flashes and swinging curtains. Most days, I don't feel alone at all, just watched over by something that's less hostile than forgotten. Some mornings, I find the toy moved, or a comb balanced on the tub's curved rim, and I offer a soft, thank you. This is what home means now, a place stitched together by echo and memory, where the past keeps brushing softly against the present, always just out of sight. And every night, before turning off the bathroom light, I whisper my own small message to the air, hoping she finds it wherever she is, waiting behind the curtain. There's a certain stillness in the pine woods at midnight, a silence so deep it clings to skin and turns every breath into a secret. Some folks say the lights that drift between the trees are tricks of the moon or swamp gas, but I learned, the hard way, that some lights are watching and waiting, and once you've seen them, they never truly let you go. The pines behind our old house in Jackson County stood so dense, they made the world feel smaller, darker. My name is Mercy, and I grew up learning every twist of the trail and every shadow cast by the needle-thick branches. On moonless nights, the woods pressed in heavy, swallowing the noise of the highway and muffling every sign of life but my pulse. It wasn't just isolation. Those woods always felt aware, like they'd seen too much and stretched too far back for anyone's comfort. Most evenings, our family kept to the porch, swapping stories while cicadas scored the sunset and moths battered porch lights with stubborn hope. Sometimes, the older ones spoke of witch lights, faint, greenish orbs weaving through the undergrowth, rarely in the same place twice. To me as a child, it sounded like another tall tale meant to keep restless feet from wandering off, until the whispers grew sharper and the warnings more direct. The summer I turned 16, the heat drew the air tight across the yard, thick with the smell of pine sap and old cigarettes. Nights grew restless. The lights started showing up more often, gliding between the trees in shapes I scarce believed were natural. I'd see a quick flicker beyond the rusty swing set, and for a second the world felt blank, like the air forgot how to breathe. I wasn't the only one who noticed, but I was the only one brave, or foolish, enough to go looking. One night, after my family's voices faded, after the last screen door slammed, and the crickets took over, I slipped out the back, skirting the edge of the property with a flashlight too weak for comfort. The woods drew close, my footsteps shallow for fear the pines might hear my intent. At first, all was quiet. I found nothing but the hush of my own heartbeat and the stubborn whine of a distant mosquito. I began to hum, tentative, pushing nervousness into the tune. Then, as if cued, a glow blinked on between two drooping pines. It hovered, soft as candlelight, pulsing with a rhythm not meant for human hearts. I froze, fighting every urge to run or call out. The light drifted, slow and patient, weaving through low branches and spinning lazy circles. It felt ancient, as if the forest itself was exhaling a secret, tempting me closer. Every tale I'd been told came flooding back. Don't chase, don't answer, don't let curiosity win. But curiosity is its own sort of hunger, and mine was starving. I followed with careful steps. The ground became uneven, thick root clusters snagging at my ankles. The air grew colder, the silence denser. The light slipped between trunks, teasing me onward. I left the safety of familiar ground and plunged deeper than I'd ever gone. The pine needles beneath my shoes felt soft, almost spongy, as if they were hiding something buried dry and brittle. Midway into the woods, the light paused, brightening for an instant. I stopped, desperate to keep it in view, but aware of my own pulse rushing. Then, without warning, a heavy presence pressed against my chest, dense, suffocating. It was as if something with weight, something old, was sitting on me, squeezing every thought and fear into a single shuddering point. My flashlight flickered, then died, plunging me into a world lit only by green fire. That pressure intensified, a paralysis rooting me in place. I struggled to move, to call out, but my voice was gone. From the corners of my vision, shadows began to gather, coalescing into almost human shapes, tall, thin, twisted. They whispered, voices layered over each other, a dozen threads speaking all at once. I couldn't hear the words, but the feeling was clear. Warning, hunger, loneliness. The light swirled in closer, and the shapes edged forward, a circle of intent, though their faces were stretched and changed by flickering glow. I wanted to close my eyes, but felt afraid to lose sight of what watched me. The old tales, the warnings from childhood, looped in my mind. Witch lights never meant you well. Minutes passed, or hours, I couldn't tell. Eventually the pressure eased, but the hush remained. The light retreated, drawing the shapes with it, until nothing but pine shadows looked back at me. My legs buckled, and I collapsed to the forest floor, cold sweat slick against my skin. When I woke, it was dawn, and the world felt wrong. I was lying in an unfamiliar part of the woods, halfway up a shallow ravine, draped in pine needles and marked with strange lines. A crescent, a circle, a half-faded footprint. My throat was raw, as if I'd screamed, though memory said otherwise. I limped home, every step weighed down with the sense that something followed, watching with detached patience. After that night, I avoided the woods, though the lights kept coming, closer, bolder, unafraid of my reluctance. Sometimes, as I lay in bed, I'd feel the pressure return, a heaviness pinning me to the sheets, the room suffused with pale green glow. My family grew distant, wary, as if the lights cast a shadow over not just me but everyone near. Doors stayed locked, voices whispered, and the old stories stopped. For fear, I suppose, that naming a thing draws it in. It wasn't just the lights, though. The air seemed charged, heavy, waiting for the right moment to shift. Objects vanished. Old shoes, photographs, a favorite brush. Sometimes they'd return, days later, marked with sticky resin or a faint scorch. Once, I found a pine cone placed square on my pillow, surrounded by a ring of glimmering sap. I didn't touch it. A strange cold followed me, disrupting sleep and gnawing at my peace. Some nights, I'd jolt awake, unable to move, breath frozen as the light played patterns on my walls. Whispers curled through the hush, threading themselves around my thoughts, binding sense and fear together. And every morning, without fail, the marks would be there, circles and crescents traced in grit by something not human. The world outside grew distant. I stopped answering calls, shut out neighbors, spent days watching the woods from behind thick curtains. Family dropped by less and less, their eyes searching my face for traces of old wounds or explanations they would never get. The doctor said my heart seemed fine, but at night it ran wild, beating to rhythms the woods had taught me. Spring brought no relief. The lights grew busier, weaving between fallen logs, skimming across standing water left by seasonal rains. Thunderstorms raked the sky, but the witch lights always returned after the last distant rumble faded. I saw patterns each night, one light, then two, then half a dozen spinning like dancers. Shadows came and went, multiplying, fading, whispering. Some things are lonelier than quiet pines. I learned, slowly, to become part of the silence, blending fear into routine. I closed my windows, kept salt at every sill, recited old prayers under my breath. Still, the lights found their way inside my head. Even on the brightest afternoons, I'd catch a greenish flinch in the glass, a memory replaying in empty corners. I never told anyone the whole truth, not even when a neighbor vanished, their house left cold and sour, marked by rings of pine resin on every threshold. No one asked questions, but doors locked tighter, shades drawn lower. The stories faded, replaced by caution, but no one could quite forget that the woods waited with a patience nothing human could match. Last autumn, I made one last walk into the trees. The air was brittle, stung with frost. The lights came as they always did, gentle, circling, almost playful. I stood my ground, closed my eyes, and let the silence press close. I whispered a plea, mostly for peace, partly for answers, and the pressure faded. For a brief moment, the woods felt empty, normal, like the past had retreated, but scars linger. Even now, I wake some nights to find my breath tangled with hush, and my dreams stitched with runes, crescents, circles. Some nights, I see the lights again, dancing beyond the porch in impossible, deliberate patterns. I watch, warning myself not to look too long, because some things with patience can wait a lifetime, and some secrets never truly leave. It isn't the wind that hums when the sun sinks behind the bare trees of Lonesome Gap. If you ever hear a song in the holler after dark, one that twists with a mother's lullaby but never remembers the words, you listen and you pray it passes you by. My name is Skyla, and where I'm from, the legends feel heavier than the clouds that hunker over these hills. More real somehow, when the moon's thin and the air is brittle. My folks settled the edge of Lonesome Gap generations ago. There are some places the road forgets, places where forest crowds so tight the sky's a stutter of stars, and the dark comes early, thick, and cold. People here learn what's real by what survives. Cabins stubborn as stumps, names worn down like old coins, memories you'd rather not own. But there's always been something else, older, more patient. A warning that took form in the story of the Bone Lady. I heard the tale first curled at the wood stove, knees hugged to my chest, as my grandma pressed a mug of hot tea into my hands. She spoke with a hush meant for secrets. Never step outside after sunset. Never answer a voice you can't see. Never follow the humming that drifts across the gap. The Bone Lady, she said, comes walking when the mist hangs low. She hums for children who've wandered too far. Sometimes she's your mother. Sometimes a thing in the skin of a stranger. But you'll know her by the chill she leaves and the bones she carries. As a child, this was terror and thrill, a ghost tale too vivid to be just talk. But with time, you let the stories fade, until something brings them back. It began one October, after the frost left fingers across the fields, and fog clung in patchwork lumps, almost alive. I was old enough that I should have known better, though that didn't slow my feet. My parents both worked shifts that chewed up the night, and I minded my little brother till sleep claimed us both. The days blurred. Nothing moved but the wind and the circling crows, and our world meant nothing to the maps hung in far-off offices. That week, something started humming around dusk, a snatch of tune that melted into the drone of crickets and the hush of the woods. At first, I thought it was just the wind fussing through the kitchen vent, but the sound grew. A woman's voice, caught between gentle and wrong. I'd catch myself listening for it, finding my skin prickling for no reason at all. I chalked it up to nerves, told myself not to mention it, but on the third night the humming came closer. I heard it right outside the kitchen window, the words lost but the tune circling in slow loops. My brother whimpered, pulling his threadbare quilt tighter around his ears. I shushed him and turned on every light in the house. Sleep didn't last long. I woke with the scent of damp earth flooding in, the window sashes trembling. There, outside, a shape moved. A thin thing, more shadow than person, head tipped like a woman listening for a crying child. I couldn't move, couldn't call out. My breath fogged the glass, hot with panic. I heard soft footsteps, bare, slow, and oddly light, like someone carrying nothing but their own bones. The humming slid into words I almost recognized, but whenever I tried to catch them, they twisted away. The shape faded into the mist, as if it had never been. Morning showed nothing amiss. No tracks in the frost, not even a dent in the dead grass. But all that day, a feeling followed me. That heaviness when someone stares, waiting on a mistake. My friends at school claimed not to hear or see a thing, chalking up my nerves to stories. But the old folks grew quiet, eyes darting toward the window. Some things are best left unspoken, one muttered. It struck me that maybe silence was its own protection. Not wanting to bring fear to the house, I stayed quiet, even as the visitations grew bolder. The humming showed up night after night, sometimes circling the chimney, sometimes weaving through cracks in the walls. My brother woke screaming to dreams of hands scraping at the window, but I could do nothing but hold him, whispering whatever prayer I could half remember. It came to a pitch on Halloween, when the hills clustered under cloud and the moon hid its face. That night, the humming didn't just circle the house, it seeped through. Shadows stretched up the walls, and for the first time I heard words, broken, pleading, older than memory. Come to me, little one. My brother's bed was empty, quilt slipping across the floor toward the door. I lunged after him, fighting a wind that had no source and a darkness that carried thoughts not my own. We tumbled onto the porch, air sharp and burning, and there at the edge of the yard stood a figure, bone thin, wrapped in a shroud of mist, face hidden by a mass of tangled hair. In her arms sat a bundle, tiny, skeletal, swaddled in scraps of moss and faded ribbon. The humming grew, cords spinning into a wail. I covered my brother's ears and screamed for help, but the darkness swallowed every word. The bone lady's head tipped, and I saw just for an instant something hungry in the empty holes where eyes might have been. I called on every name I knew, family, saints, even the wind itself. Then I began to sing, desperate and furious, the only lullaby I could half recall. The bone lady paused, her body shivering like a candle flame. The humming faded, replaced by a silence vast as the night. A sharp wind broke the spell. The figure melted away, leaving nothing but a whirl of frost at the yard's edge and the echo of that terrible wordless tune. I brought my brother inside, set a line of salt at every sill, and burned a candle in every room till the sun rose. Next morning, the house felt cleaner, as if the darkness had been forced outside. My brother forgot the night's terror. I never did. I never spoke of what happened, not even when the humming tried once or twice to slip in with the dusk. Every year, I hear stories of wandering children, lost only for a night, returning marked with bruises shaped like hands, or of neighbors finding odd bone bundles at their doors in the fog. The bone lady still walks the gap. Some say she's a mercy, come to gather the lost before the wild can have them. Others say she's hunger herself, a song turned curse. All I know is that she hums beneath the cold stars, sowing fear and warning with every note. If you ever find yourself on the far side of the ridge, with darkness pressing close and the world gone small, listen close when the wind rises. If you hear humming, don't answer. Hold tight to those you love, and remember, legends are only stories until the night you become one, 'cause some lullabies out here are sung just for you. Some families in Greenbrier County never let their children sleep alone, especially in houses older than memory. They call it caution, but truth is, we all remember what happens when justice depends not on the living, but on the dead. My name is Byron, and my family's history is sewn into the fabric of West Virginia's hills, stitched with stories that most outsiders refuse to believe. We're courthouse folks, clerks and jurors, lawyers and deputies, all with some tale of the Greenbrier ghost. Growing up, I didn't give much heed to haunted things, as busy with real troubles and the dust of old records as anyone else. That changed the winter. My great-aunt grew sick and couldn't sleep. Caught up in dreams the rest of us wished she'd forget. The dreams started small, a flicker at the edges of her mind, a whisper that wouldn't shape into words. But every night, the ghost grew bolder, and every morning, my aunt awoke with another piece of a story that no one wanted to finish. She called her cousin's name in her sleep, her voice thin and raspy like leaves scratching glass. By February, the whole house felt colder, as if something mourned in the walls. Folks say the Greenbrier ghost first made itself known in the late 1800s, when a woman named Zona Heaster-Shue died and her spirit returned to reveal her killer. My family always swore our bloodline felt the echo of that verdict. Like justice never really left the land, always watching, always restless. Evenings in my childhood were measured in ghost tales, winter winds, and long shadows. But this was the first time a haunting felt less like story and more like fate. When my aunt's cousin came to stay after a house fire, she claimed the dreams chased her too. They heard Zona's voice, soft, trembling, reciting a name and, sometimes, a place on the old country map. My father dismissed it as nerves, a side effect of old age and bad luck, till one night I heard the voice myself. A woman's whisper at the foot of my bed, short and clipped, the kind of warning that makes your skin crawl and your lungs stall. I started sleeping with the light on, restless and feverish, feeling watched but unable to flee. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the courthouse. High ceilings, wood paneling, stained glass dark under thunderclouds. Zona's story flickered in my memory, her ghost appearing night after night, each visit sharper, colder, more desperate for justice. Weeks passed. My aunt wrote fevered letters to the local historical society, describing the ghost in detail. Faded dress, wild hair, eyes hollow as a winter sky. Her cousin stopped eating, her hands trembling when daylight faded. Some days, papers went missing from the archive. Other times, verdicts from years back appeared stacked on the kitchen table, yellow and brittle, but newly relevant. The wind howled through empty hallways, and some mornings we found doors swinging wide. Frost pooled in neat circles on the old tile. I tried to talk sense, chalking it up to coincidence and fear, but every night Zona's story pressed back. I read old transcripts, the murder trial, the accounts of her mother's dreams. The conviction won not by evidence, but by haunting. My family always said we lived with ghosts. Now I understood what that truly meant. Finally, the sleeplessness and cold built to a breaking point. My aunt, in her fitful half-sleep, began to mutter about a hidden letter, something Zona's spirit wanted discovered. We ripped through drawers and cabinets, finding at last a crumpled, musty envelope, its edges gnawed by mice. Inside were words, written decades ago, a confession unsigned and unfinished. It took days to make sense of it, the handwriting looping and sharp. The story was old, but not so different from the ones I knew. Zona's name was there, once or twice, alongside warnings and pleas for forgiveness. My father and the cousin took it to the local judge, just in case. No one expected much, not with all the years gone by. But justice is a curious thing in Greenbrier County. Some say the dead have more power than the living, at least with the right audience. The judge opened a half-day's hearing, reading the confession aloud, adding it to the thick folder of lore and fact. The ambling of the case through official channels awoke something in our house. The cold eased. Dreams grew lighter. The ghost's voice faded, replaced by the ordinary hush of winter nights. A week after the confession was admitted into the records, my aunt found sleep. Her cousin's appetite returned, and the courthouse grew warmer, as if the building itself could sigh. The old family stories found new homes, less in sleepless whispers and more in careful retellings at local gatherings. Zona's ghost, some say, finally let go. I never saw her again, though some evenings the courthouse windows reflect a face I don't know, pale and searching, just for a heartbeat before dusk packs up the day. Sometimes justice comes late, but in Appalachia, it always comes, whether we wish it or not. If you ever find yourself with a secret in Greenbrier County, remember, the dead are listening, verdicts are never truly forgotten, and every old house holds more than just history. Some ghosts linger till you listen. In the years my family farmed the northern ridge, we learned that scissors make a sound when they're cutting nothing at all. It's a snip-snip that travels through walls, a rhythm that belongs to something neither human nor kind, and once it finds your house, it never truly leaves. My name is Joe, and I come from people who worked the land till their hands bled and their backs bent permanent. The farm sat isolated, hemmed by forest and silence, a place where neighbors were miles apart and help came slow if it came at all. We raised what we could, sold what we couldn't eat, and kept our heads down through seasons that ground us thin. But the farm had a history older than our claim, and some debts we learned aren't paid in coin or sweat. It started the autumn after my grandfather passed. He'd been the kind of man who spoke little, prayed less, but carried himself with the weight of someone who'd seen things he refused to name. After he died, the house felt different. Not empty, exactly, but watchful, like the walls had started paying attention. My father said it was grief playing tricks, but my mother knew better. She'd grown up with stories, the kind that kept children indoors after dark and made grown men check their windows twice before sleep. The first night we heard it, my mother was mending clothes by lamplight. The rest of us half asleep in the warmth of the stove. A soft, rhythmic sound drifted through the house. Snip, snip, snip. She looked up, confused, and set down her needle. "Someone cutting cloth?" she asked, but no one answered. The sound continued, steady as a heartbeat, moving from room to room like it had purpose. My father searched the house, lantern swinging, but found nothing. No open windows, no stray animals, no explanation. The snipping stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the weight of our unease. We tried to forget it, chalking it up to old wood settling or wind threading through cracks. But the next night, it came back, louder, closer, more insistent. By the third night, we found the evidence. Cloth throughout the house, curtains, quilts, spare fabric my mother kept in drawers, had been cut. Not torn, but cleanly sliced, crescents and circles removed with precision no mouse or moth could manage. My mother's face went pale. "The clipping spook," she whispered, a name she'd heard as a child, a legend she'd hoped never to meet. The stories varied, but the core was always the same. A poltergeist that tormented families, cutting fabric, throwing stones, driving livestock wild, and refusing all attempts at banishment. Some said it followed bloodlines, others that it attached to houses built on cursed ground. My grandfather had never spoken of it, but his silence, we realized, might have been its own warning. The attacks escalated. Stones flew through windows with no visible source. The dog howled and cowered, refusing to enter certain rooms. At night, the snipping grew so loud it drowned out conversation, a mocking rhythm that seemed to laugh at our helplessness. My father tried everything: locked doors, blessed water from the church, even calling in the preacher, who left shaken and unwilling to return. The preacher said he'd felt something push him, heard voices cursing in languages he didn't recognize, and seen shadows move against the light in ways that defied reason. Neighbors started talking. Some offered sympathy, others suspicion, wondering what we'd done to invite such attention. The farm's reputation soured. No one would visit after dark, and even daylight visitors kept their stays brief, eyes darting toward corners, ears straining for the telltale snip-snip that marked the spook's presence. My mother grew thin, sleepless, her hands trembling whenever she picked up fabric. My father's temper frayed, arguments erupting over nothing, the weight of the haunting crushing whatever peace we'd once known. I tried to be brave, but fear became a constant companion, a tightness in my chest that never fully eased. One night, the spook revealed itself, or as much of itself as anything that broken could reveal. I woke to the sound of cutting, so close it seemed to be happening inside my pillow. I opened my eyes and saw, in the dim moonlight filtering through torn curtains, a shape, thin, hunched, its hands moving with mechanical precision, snipping at the air itself. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in shadow, but I felt its awareness, its hunger, its rage. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, frozen by a terror so complete it stole my voice. When the shape finally faded, dissolving into darkness like smoke, I found my blanket shredded, crescents cut so clean they looked machine-made. I stumbled to my parents' room, choking on words, but they'd heard it too, and seen it. My mother wept. My father sat silent, defeated, staring at the floor. By spring, we couldn't take it anymore. The farm was failing, the animals sick or dead, the crops stunted, the house a prison of fear and sleepless nights. We packed what little we had and left, abandoning the land my family had worked for generations. As we drove away, I looked back and saw, in the upstairs window, a flicker of movement. A hand, perhaps, or the glint of scissors catching the light. We settled elsewhere, started over, but the memory never left. My mother refused to keep scissors in the house, using only knives for cutting. My father grew quieter, older, haunted by the failure to protect us. And I learned that some things are older than understanding, stronger than faith, and crueler than any living enemy. Years later, I heard the farm had been abandoned, the house left to rot, overtaken by vines and silence. Locals claimed to hear snipping on quiet nights, see lights in the windows where no one lived. The legend grew, fed by whispers and fear, and the clipping spook became a cautionary tale told to children. Behave, or the spook will find you. Speak its name, and it might come calling. I've never gone back. Some places hold on to their curses, and some curses hold on to you. The sound of scissors still makes my skin crawl, and on nights when the wind cuts through the trees with a rhythmic hiss, I remember the farm, the fear, and the thing that drove us away. Out here, in these old hills, some stories never end. They just wait, snipping at the edges of the world, patient as stone, hungry as the dark. They say Brown Mountain's lights are just old campfires reflected in the mist, or maybe gas seeping from forgotten mines. But I know what I saw the night my best friend followed them into the dark, and I know why the search parties found nothing but his footprints, circling the same spot over and over till the ground itself turned black. My name is Emery, and I grew up in the shadow of Brown Mountain, where the ridge cuts sharp against the Carolina sky, and the woods hold secrets older than the roads that wind through them. The lights have been there forever, dancing orbs that float above the tree line on certain nights, glowing soft as candles or bright as headlights, never staying in one place, never following any pattern you could predict. Scientists came through every few years with their instruments and theories, but none of them stayed long enough to see what happens when you get too close. We were raised on the stories. Hikers who vanished, hunters who came back different, locals who swore the lights were spirits or omens or something worse. My friend and I used to laugh at the tales, chalking them up to mountain superstition and too much moonshine. We were 17, bulletproof in the way only young fools can be. And when we decided to camp on the ridge one October weekend, we did it with bravado and beer and absolutely no sense of what we were walking into. The night started clear and cold, stars scattered thick across the black, the kind of sky that makes you feel small in a good way. We built a fire, told bad jokes, and settled into the easy rhythm of friendship that doesn't need constant conversation. Then, around midnight, the lights appeared. 3 of them at first, hovering just above the tree line, maybe a quarter-mile out. They pulsed gently, orange fading to white and back again, moving in slow arcs that seemed almost deliberate. My friend stood, eyes locked on them, and I felt the shift immediately, the way the air thickened, the way the crickets went silent, the way his expression changed from curiosity to something harder, hungrier. "We should go see," he said, his voice flat, distant, like he was reading lines from a script he didn't understand. I tried to talk him down, remind him of every story we'd ever heard, but he wasn't listening. He started walking, boots crunching through dead leaves, flashlight swinging at his side. I followed, shouting, grabbing his arm, but he shrugged me off with surprising strength. The lights drifted farther into the woods, always just out of reach, and my friend moved faster, breaking into a jog, then a run. The forest closed around us, branches scratching at our faces, roots snagging our feet. The lights stayed ahead, patient and persistent, leading us deeper into terrain I didn't recognize. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I couldn't let him go alone. Then, abruptly, he stopped. We stood in a small clearing, the ground bare and strangely smooth, the lights hovering directly overhead, so bright now they hurt to look at. My friend tilted his head back, mouth open, arms spread wide, and I heard him whisper something. Not English, not any language I knew, just a string of sounds that made my skin crawl. The lights descended, wrapping around him like fog, and for a moment, I couldn't see him at all. I screamed his name, lunged forward, but something held me back, an invisible pressure, cold and unyielding. When the lights pulled away, he was still standing, but wrong. His eyes were wide and empty, his face slack, his breathing shallow. I grabbed him, shook him, but there was no recognition, no response. He just stared at the sky, that terrible whisper still leaking from his lips. I dragged him back toward camp, half carrying, half pulling, panic giving me strength I didn't know I had. The lights followed at a distance, watchful, almost playful, and I didn't stop moving till we reached the fire. By then, dawn was breaking, pale and cold, and my friend collapsed, unconscious, his skin ice cold despite the warmth of the flames. I called for help, and by noon, rangers and paramedics filled the campsite. They took him to the hospital, ran tests, found nothing physically wrong, but he never woke up. Not really. He existed in a kind of twilight, eyes open but unseeing, body functioning but mind gone. The doctors called it catatonia, trauma, a psychological break. But I knew better. The search parties went out the next day, following our trail into the woods. They found the clearing, and what they found there made the news. Footprints circling a single spot, hundreds of them, overlapping and deep, pressed into ground that was scorched black in a perfect circle 30 feet across. No explanation, no fire residue, just burned earth and the echo of something terrible. Weeks passed. My friend remained in the hospital, unresponsive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us back. I'd wake to lights outside my window, faint and flickering, and hear whispers in the wind that sounded almost like his voice. Objects moved in my room, small things at first, keys and coins, then larger items, furniture shifted, pictures turned to face the wall. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating much. The lights on Brown Mountain kept dancing, and every time I saw them, I felt the pull, the same hunger that had taken my friend. I moved away eventually, left the mountains and the memories and the terrible certainty that some things are meant to stay hidden, and some curiosity is a door you can never close. Years later, I heard he finally died. Pneumonia, they said, but I think his body just gave up waiting for his mind to come back. I attended the funeral from a distance, unable to face his family, unable to explain what I'd seen and what I'd failed to prevent. The lights still appear on Brown Mountain, still lure the curious and the brave, and every year someone else goes missing or comes back changed. I've learned to live with the guilt, the fear, and the knowledge that there are things in these old mountains that don't care about science or skepticism or the fragile certainty of human understanding. The lights are still there, patient as stone, waiting for the next person to follow, to wonder, to reach too far into the dark. If you ever find yourself near Brown Mountain and you see the lights dancing against the night, turn away. Don't chase them. Don't wonder what they are or where they lead. Some mysteries are doors, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed. My friend learned that the hard way, and I've spent every day since trying to forget the look in his empty eyes and the whisper of something ancient calling his name. I've heard mountain cats scream in the dark, and I've heard wind tear through trees like it's angry. But the sound that drifted through our camp that night was something else entirely. A woman crying, deep in the Smoky Mountains, where no woman had any business being. My name is Zaylin, and I learned early that the mountains don't care about your plans or your courage. I grew up hunting with family, tracking deer through laurel thickets, and setting traps in places most folks wouldn't dare venture. The wilderness felt like home, until the night it showed me I was never really welcome. We'd gone deep into the Smokies that October, chasing stories of a massive buck that had been spotted near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. 3 days in, miles from the nearest trail, we made camp in a hollow ringed by ancient hemlocks. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and the silence pressed down heavy, the kind that makes you whisper without thinking. The first night passed quiet. We ate canned beans and jerky, swapped stories around the fire, and turned in early, exhausted from the hike. I remember lying in my tent, listening to the canvas rustle and the distant hoot of an owl, feeling satisfied and safe in the cocoon of familiar sounds. The second night changed everything. Around midnight, I woke to crying, soft at first, then louder. A woman's voice, breaking on sobs that sounded raw and desperate. I sat up, heart hammering, straining to pinpoint the direction. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the ridge, carried on wind that had no reason to blow. I unzipped my tent and found the others already awake, faces pale in the firelight. No one spoke. We just listened, frozen, as the crying circled our camp, moving closer with each pass. It wasn't human. Not quite. The tone was right, the emotion real, but something underneath felt wrong, like an imitation that didn't understand what it was copying. One of the group grabbed a flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. The crying stopped instantly, replaced by silence so complete it felt like the mountain was holding its breath. We waited, every muscle tense, but nothing moved. Eventually exhaustion won, and we retreated to our tents, though none of us slept. The next day we found tracks circling our camp, massive prints, too large for a deer, wrong-shaped for a bear. The claws were long, deep gouges in the soft earth, and the stride suggested something that moved on 4 legs but could stand on 2. My uncle, who'd hunted these mountains for 40 years, went quiet, his jaw tight. "Wampus cat," he muttered, and the name hung in the air like a curse. I'd heard the stories. A woman cursed and transformed, half woman, half cat, wandering the mountains in search of something she'd lost or someone who'd wronged her. Some said she wept for her children, others that she hunted those foolish enough to venture too deep. The legends varied, but the warning stayed the same. If you hear her crying, leave. Don't look. Don't answer. Don't stay. We should have packed up right then, but pride and stubbornness kept us rooted. We'd come for the buck, and we weren't leaving empty-handed. That decision, made in daylight with coffee and bravado, felt reasonable. By nightfall, it felt like suicide. The crying started earlier that evening, before full dark, and it was closer. We built the fire high, stacking wood till the flames licked at the sky, and we kept our rifles close. The sobs twisted into wails, guttural and pained, and beneath them, a low growl that vibrated through the ground. Then we saw it, a shape moving through the trees, massive, and low to the ground, eyes reflecting green in the firelight. It circled us slowly, deliberately, the crying never stopping, and I realized with sick clarity that the sound wasn't meant to lure us away. It was meant to keep us frozen, terrified, while it decided what to do. One of the group fired a warning shot. The shape paused, tilted its head, and the crying shifted into something worse. Laughter, high and mocking, layered over the sobs. It moved again, faster now, and I caught a glimpse of fur, mottled and mangy, and something that might have been a face, twisted and wrong, caught between forms. We fired into the dark, not aiming, just desperate to make it stop. The shape vanished into the underbrush, the laughter fading, and for a moment, we thought we'd won. Then the smell hit, animal musk mixed with something rotten, thick enough to choke on. We gagged, eyes watering, and I heard one of the others vomit. The rest of the night passed in terrified silence. We didn't sleep, didn't lower our guard, just sat with our backs to the fire, weapons ready, waiting for dawn. When light finally broke, we packed in minutes and hiked out faster than we'd come in, leaving behind gear we couldn't carry and the buck we'd never found. We didn't talk about it much after. What could we say that wouldn't sound insane? But I've never gone back to that part of the Smokies, and I've never hunted alone since. The mountains keep their secrets, and some creatures, cursed or wild or something in between, don't want to be understood. They just want to be feared. If you ever camp deep in the Smokies and you hear a woman crying in the night, remember this: it's not a woman, and it's not lost. It knows exactly where you are, and it's deciding whether you're worth the trouble. Pack your gear, douse your fire, and leave before it makes up its mind. Some things out there are older than maps, meaner than hunger, impatient enough to wait for the next fool who thinks the wilderness belongs to them. My uncle was the kind of man who never looked back, never second-guessed a decision, and never spoke about the things he picked up on lonely mountain roads. But every time he drove that old highway past Grundy, his hands would grip the wheel a little tighter, and his eyes would flick to the rearview mirror, searching for something he hoped he'd never see again. My name is Massimo, and I come from a long line of people who keep their heads down and their business quiet. My uncle worked the night shift at a lumber mill outside Grundy, Virginia, driving the same winding mountain highway 5 nights a week for over 20 years. He was practical, steady, the kind of man who'd stop to help a stranger or share his last dollar without hesitation. That generosity, that instinct to do right, is what brought her into his life, and what made him question everything he thought he understood about the world. It started on a November night, rain coming down in sheets, the kind that turns roads into rivers and visibility into a guessing game. My uncle was heading home, exhausted, windshield wipers barely keeping up, when he saw her. A figure on the shoulder, thumb out, soaked through and shivering. She wore a red scarf that somehow stayed bright despite the downpour, and her face, pale and drawn, carried the kind of weariness that comes from walking too long with nowhere to go. He pulled over without thinking, the way he always did. She climbed in without a word, water pooling on the seat, that red scarf vivid against her damp hair. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, almost melodic, and he nodded, pulling back onto the road. "Where are you headed?" he asked, and she gestured vaguely up the mountain. "Just up the pass," she said. "I'll tell you when." They drove in silence, the rain drumming overhead, the heater struggling to cut through the cold. My uncle tried small talk, weather, the late hour, the treacherous roads. But her answers came short and distracted, like her mind was elsewhere. He noticed she didn't fidget, didn't check her phone, didn't do any of the small, restless things people do when they're uncomfortable. She just sat, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. Halfway up the pass, where the road narrows and the drop-off turns steep, she spoke again. "Here," she said, and he slowed, confused. There was nothing there, no driveway, no house, just forest and fog and the faint glow of his headlights against wet asphalt. "You sure?" he asked, and she nodded, reaching for the door handle. "Thank you," she said again, and then she was gone, slipping into the mist before he could argue or offer to take her farther. He sat there for a moment, uneasy, then shook it off and continued home. It wasn't till he parked in his driveway 20 minutes later that he noticed it. The red scarf, draped across the passenger seat, still damp, smelling faintly of rain and something else, wildflowers maybe, or river water. He picked it up, intending to return it next time he drove that route, but the moment his fingers touched the fabric, a chill ran through him, deep and bone cold, like he'd brushed against something that didn't belong in the living world. The next night, driving the same route, he kept an eye out for her, slowing near the spot where she'd gotten out. No sign. No figure on the roadside. Just the mountain and the dark and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He brought the scarf with him, planning to return it if he saw her. But she never appeared. Instead, he started noticing things. Small, impossible things. The scarf, left on his dashboard, would move. Not much, just shifted slightly, as if someone had picked it up and set it down again. The smell grew stronger, less like flowers, and more like deep earth and old water, the kind that's been sitting too long in forgotten wells. At night, lying in bed, he'd hear faint sounds. A woman's voice, humming a tune he didn't recognize, always just on the edge of hearing. He asked around at the diner, the gas station, anywhere locals gathered. You ever see a woman hitchhiking up by the pass, red scarf? The answers varied. Some shrugged, others grew quiet, eyes shifting. One old man, a regular at the diner, leaned in close. Red scarf, he repeated. You gave her a ride, didn't you? My uncle nodded, and the old man sighed. She's been walking that road for 40 years, maybe more. Died in a wreck up near the pass. They say she's looking for someone, or maybe just trying to get home, but she never makes it. And if you give her a ride... He trailed off, shaking his head. What? My uncle pressed. What happens? She stays with you, not in body, but in other ways. Things move, sounds at night. You feel her, watching, waiting. Some folks say she's harmless, just lonely. Others say she's angry, that the longer you keep something of hers, the worse it gets. My uncle went home that night and tried to get rid of the scarf. He threw it in the trash, then the river, even tried burning it in the yard. But every time, by morning, it was back. On his seat, on his porch, hanging from his rearview mirror. The presence grew stronger. He'd wake to the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of his bed, the mattress dipping under invisible weight. He'd see movement in his peripheral vision, a flash of red in rooms where nothing should be. He stopped sleeping well. His co-workers noticed. The bags under his eyes, the way he startled at sudden noises, the distant look when someone spoke to him. He started taking different routes, avoiding that stretch of highway altogether, but it didn't matter. She'd found him, and she wasn't letting go. One night, months later, he broke. He drove back to the pass, scarf in hand, and pulled over at the exact spot where she'd vanished. Rain fell again, just like that first night, and he stood on the shoulder, holding the scarf out into the dark. I'm sorry, he said, voice raw. I didn't know. I was just trying to help. Please, just take it back. The wind rose, sudden and fierce, and the scarf ripped from his hands, carried up and away into the fog. For a moment, he thought he saw her, standing at the edge of the trees, red scarf bright against the gloom, her face turned toward him, expression unreadable. Then she was gone, and the wind died, and the night grew still. After that, the haunting stopped. The scarf never returned, the sounds faded, and my uncle finally slept through the night. But he was changed. He stopped picking up hitchhikers, no matter the weather or the hour. He drove that highway with his eyes forward, never slowing, never looking too long at the shadows on the roadside. And when I asked him about it, years later, he told me the story in a voice that still carried a tremor of fear. Some people, he said, aren't meant to be helped. Some debts can't be paid, and some roads, once you've traveled them, follow you home, no matter how far you run. I think about that story every time I drive at night, every time I see someone standing on the shoulder, thumb out, face desperate. And I keep driving, hands tight on the wheel, because I know now that kindness isn't always rewarded, and some passengers never really leave. If you've made it this far into the shadows with us, you're officially part of the Haunted Fears horror family. These mountains hold more stories than we can ever tell, and every one of them is waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we keep digging deeper into the dark corners of Appalachia. Because out here, the stories never end, and neither does the fear. Welcome to Haunted Fears. We'll see you in the next nightmare.